This is The Wire for 2300 Zulu, June 14th, 2025. President's is priority. Information cutoff is 2200. Bottom line up front. Congresswoman assassinated, senator wounded in Minnesota, assailant remains at large. Nationwide No Kings protests remain largely low intensity during daylight, though several incidents reported. Nationwide counter-ICE protests remain more kinetic. Beginning with international events, in the Middle East, the Israeli-Iranian war continues as before, with both nations continuing to trade missiles overnight. Israeli forces have conducted more strikes targeting Iranian petroleum, oil, and lubricant or POL production facilities, and Iranian forces have responded by striking the POL refinery in Haifa. On the home front, in the United States, most of the No Kings protests did go ahead as planned, though as expected turnout was comparatively low throughout the morning in most areas. During the daytime protest events, most of the participants at most of the No Kings protests have been elderly, which resulted in most of the No Kings events remaining relatively low impact. However, many counter-ICE protests were conducted separately around the nation, many of which became kinetic. Standard cases of vandalism, civil unrest, and violence were reported in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York City, Seattle, and several other major cities. In Minnesota, overnight, an individual posing as a police officer conducted multiple assassination attempts at the homes of two local politicians in Minneapolis. Senator John Hoffman and his wife were ambushed at their home in Champlin by a gunman who posed as a police officer. Both were wounded during the attack. Later that same night, State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark were ambushed in their home in Brooklyn Park. Both Hortman and her husband were killed in the attack. Due to the similarities in their names and these incidents taking place in close proximity to each other, the full casualty count regarding these attacks is as follows. Senator John Hoffman was wounded at the scene in Champlin, and he is expected to survive. Yvette Hoffman, his wife, was also wounded at the scene in Champlin, and she is expected to survive. Representative Melissa Hortman was killed at the scene in Brooklyn Park. Mark Hortman, her husband, was critically wounded at the scene in Brooklyn Park, but later died at a hospital. The assailant remains at large, and a manhunt is underway in the Brooklyn Park area to locate the suspect. The suspect's vehicle, which was camouflaged to appear as a police cruiser, was recovered at the scene of the second series of murders. Inside the vehicle were stacks of handwritten leaflets marked No Kings, referencing today's planned protest events. Also found inside the vehicle was a hit list referencing targeting efforts of other politicians. However, the details of this document had not yet been released. In Texas, this morning a fire was reported at the Marathon refinery in Texas City. In Austin, the state capitol was evacuated this afternoon after an unidentified threat was presented to lawmakers. As of this afternoon, no amplifying information has been released regarding this incident. In Virginia, a vehicle ramming attack was attempted in Culpeper as an individual drove his vehicle into one of the No Kings protests that was dispersing. Local authorities state that Joseph Cheklik Jr. intentionally accelerated into the crowd, striking one person in the process. The assailant was arrested at the scene. Analyst comments for this wire. At the moment, the assassinations and attempts in Minnesota are highly controversial topics, and speculation does not often make the situation any better. However, in this case, some speculation is needed to convey the potential future threats that may be ongoing due to the fugitive remaining at large. When time is of the essence, speculation that aids in the success of an investigation is doctrinally acceptable. As such, the possibility must be considered that this may have been the actions of not just a lone gunman and/or a mental case, but rather a deliberate assassination at the behest of significantly powerful organizations and/or populations. A few days ago, Representative Hortman crossed party lines to be the only Democrat that voted with the Republicans to support a bill that would ban illegal immigrants from receiving Minnesota's state welfare benefits. Most notably, Representative Hortman participated in several media interviews, being visibly upset for begrudgingly supporting the bill. Clearly, local authorities also suspect the link to be related to a political issue, since Hoffman and Hortman worked together. After the report of the shooting at Hoffman's home, authorities raced to Hortman's home a few miles away to preemptively check on the congresswoman. After arriving at Hortman's house, police ran into the shooter, who was exiting the structure, having already committed the shootings inside. After a brief small-arms skirmish, the suspect evaded capture and departed from the area, prompting the large manhunt. Regarding the shooter's identity, authorities claim that the individual is Vance Luther Bolter, a senior advisor and political activist who was appointed by Governor Tim Walz to serve on the governor's Workforce Development Board back in 2019. However, details surrounding the suspect's connections will be confusing until more information becomes public. While it's easy to assume the connection to Hortman due to her voting history, at the moment it's possible she wasn't the primary target. Hoffman and his wife were targeted first. Considering that a hit list was discovered at the scene, it is extremely likely that the officers who had the idea to check on Hortman saved lives. Unfortunately, Hortman and her husband did not survive the assassination attempt, but the officers engaging the suspect, and thus causing him to flee on foot, very likely prevented the shooter from continuing down his hit list to the next target. This concludes The Wire for 2300 Zulu, June 14th, 2025.